And I hope we have once again reminded people that man is not free unless government is limited. There's a clear cause and effect here that is as neat and predictable as a law of physics. As government expands, liberty contracts.
From this day forward, it's going to be only America first. America first.
The Liberty Podcast is brought to you by Proven Arms and Outfitters, specializing in rifles, pistols, tactical gear, and more. Learn more at ProvenOutfitters.com.
Hello, everybody. You found me again in my undisclosed location beneath the pines. You know, some weeks I almost feel like I can't take it anymore. Keeping up with all the crazy in the world and what the left is up to and what deception and lies they're up to. And, you know, you do get weary, but we have to soldier on. And so today I am sitting up straight and looking into the camera for yet another Liberty Podcast. Welcome back. It is 5 September, believe it or not, 5 September 2024. That means we are just 4 days, by the time you see this, from the big ABC News, ABC News debate between the 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump, and the sitting Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris. Hard to say, even harder to stomach. They're both running for President of these United States. And we are now 41 days from the start of early voting in North Carolina, by the time you see this. And that would be 60 days removed from November 5th, Election Day. An important day, but not more important than any of the days available for early voting. Why don't we just call it extra voting or voting? Because we need to take advantage of the opportunity to get our votes in the system, to get them banked away, so that if the Democrats try to unleash some 11th hour tactic to disrupt, we will already have voted. So keep an eye on October 17th through November 2nd for your voting opportunities. There will be 2 locations in Moore County. 2. You can go to the Moore County Board of Elections website to get all the nitty-gritty details on that. Well, you know, just when you thought that maybe these lefties are going to get away with this Harris-Walz ticket from hell for president, along comes a man who is going to be one of the famous people of 2024 when all is said and done. His name is Jeff Walz. Now, nobody had ever heard of Tim Walz, even though he's the governor of Minnesota, except for Minnesotans whose lives he has been making miserable for several years during his gubernatorial reign of terror. But, you know, he has a brother, it turns out. His brother's name is Jeff Walz. Guess what he said this week? He is considering endorsing former President Trump and hinted that he could release dirt on his brother, Tubby Timmy, during the run-up to the November election. The story comes as Tim Walz is facing increased scrutiny after being caught making misleading claims about in vitro fertilization, IVF, his 1990s DUI arrest, and misconstruing his military service. When someone on Facebook suggested that he talked to his brother, who is the governor of Minnesota, Jeff Walz said that they had not spoken in 8 years. I'm 100% opposed to his ideology, Jeff Walz said. My family wasn't given any notice that he was selected and was denied security in the days after he was named as Kamala Harris's running mate. I've thought long and hard about doing something with Trump, Jeff Walz says. I'm torn between that and just keeping my family out of it. The stories I could tell. My brother is not the type of character you want making decisions about your future. Wow. You know, it takes a lot, even as dysfunctional as families can be, as many grudges as they may hold, as long as these feuds can just sort of simmer forever, smolder. It takes a lot to trash your brother when he's running for vice president of the United States, I gotta say. So he must know a lot of stuff that we should know and probably don't know. And I wonder if even Kamala Harris knows. I doubt it, because there's so much that she doesn't know about. But you know what she brings, according to some of her followers? She brings enthusiasm and joy. I was reading a guest column in the Pilot. Always a mistake to go to the op-ed page of the Pilot, because it's just a quilt work of crazy. These guest columnists, where do they find these people? I have no idea. Under a bridge somewhere? Or I have no idea. But this guy, Jonathan Waters, as in Muddy Waters, claims that in the Democratic ticket of Harris and Walz, we see enthusiasm and joy, not the dedicated mean spirit that has engulfed our nation for the past 8 years. We see an effort for a country that is striving for better wages, better access to upward mobility, better health care, and better lives. Is that what they're offering? You know, we had a lot of better under the Trump administration, 2017 through 2020. People seem to have forgotten that. And we've had a lot of worse since the onset of the Biden regime, when he doddered in to the rubber-walled Oval Office, outfitted to keep him from bumping into things and hurting himself. But I would like to add my own take on this entire nonsense about how Americans are reacting to the joy and the optimism being offered to them by this Harris person, Kamala Harris, okay? Disengaged and distracted, many Americans lament the deep division that defines the era in which we live today. Yet the 21st century Marxist left that consumes the Democrat Party, what do they stand for? I'll tell you what, dead babies, dead Israelis, and thanks to undeterred waves of murderous illegal immigrants, dead and maimed American citizens. We're not going to hear any policy from Kamala Harris on U.S.-Israel or on the U.S.-Mexico southern border, because policy that addresses these human tolls does not align with joy and hope that the media has assigned to Harris Walz. But human tolls are precisely what are exacted when the United States betrays its allies. Rather than supporting Israel's destruction of Hamas, the U.S., along with the U.K., pushed for measured responses to the October 7th, 2023 Hamas-led massacre of 1,200 innocents. And rather than urging the United Nations and other U.S. allies to join us in pooling our intelligence resources to free more than 100 Hamas-held hostages, they languish in tunnels beneath Gaza. As of September 1, 6 fewer are languishing because they are dead. 4 men and 2 women, one an Israeli-American citizen, ages 23 to 40, brutally murdered, point-blank gunshots, ended their lives in the prime of their lives, even before the prime of their lives, 23 to 40. We are reminded weekly also of the human toll exacted because the hapless Harris Biden, or are they willfully negligent? Maybe they're not hapless at all. Maybe they're willfully negligent because they refuse to take stringent actions to close the U.S.-Mexico border. After allowing at least 10 million plus to flood in since 2021, the left is expecting an election year bump because it finally cut a deal with Mexico to keep immigrants from surging. Imagine the human toll as these people are herded like animals around northern Mexico because they're not letting them cross anymore. Or worse, maybe they're not hurting them. Maybe they're just sending them off to the sex trafficking pipeline. You know, that's good money for the Mexicans, you know, if you can get it, right? This temporary border control solution is not stopping the carnage across the United States, and we'll get to some examples of that in a minute. The high-profile murders of children and women at the hands of young male illegals are nonetheless glaringly absent from the radar of these supposed legions of newly inspired Harris voters. They likely will never hear about or choose to ignore the 14-year-old girl in Indiana stabbed on August 31 by Dimas Yanez, age 26, while she watched her brother play baseball. Indiana law enforcement reports that Yanez was deported to Honduras in 2018, but along with millions, he returned to Rome cities and towns undetected and undocumented. When will the trauma of being attacked in small-town Lowell, Indiana, with a butcher knife subside for this teen victim of a Honduran illegal immigrant? I don't know. Never. But, you know, Lowell, Indiana is not the only town that is enduring the consequences of an influx of illegal immigrants. There are two that have come across my radar lately. One is in Whitewater, Wisconsin. The migrants began to trickle into Whitewater, an hour west of Milwaukee, toward the end of 2021. What happened in 2021? Oh, yeah. Joe Biden took power in the White House. Prior to their arrival, local news and political debates generally revolved around school fundraisers or the University of Wisconsin's Whitewater campus athletics, sports teams. It's a Division III school, in case you were wondering. Today, residents are focused on their 1,000 new neighbors who mostly hail from Nicaragua and Venezuela and largely keep in the shadows because they lack official identification. You don't say. Locals say the real number of migrants in the town could easily be double the number reflected in the department's official statistics. Wow. Responding to the influx of migrants has put the town in a $400,000 budget hole. And this was near to the beginning of 2024. I imagine it's only grown since then. I haven't seen anyone who isn't welcoming, said a resident, Michael Smith, but you have to have blinders on to not see that there have been problems. Everything is relatively overwhelmed. Springfield, Ohio, ladies and gentlemen. Immigrants from Haiti poured into Springfield during the last 5 years, and the estimates grow monthly, with city officials now saying the number could be 15,000 to 20,000 new residents among a population that had numbered just under 60,000 prior. The number of immigrants has strained city government in Springfield, Ohio, healthcare, schools, social services, and nonprofits trying to provide assistance. The town's mayor, Rob Rue, told residents at a commission meeting that the city did not know about the possibility of a large immigration population coming, but said a network of businesses knew what was coming. He said the city's immigrant accountability response team formed in the fall of 2023, has discovered the possibility that companies knew they were going to make an effort to bring in individuals who were crossing the border. Roos said he was upset the city did not get a chance to plan for the immigrants because, he says, Springfield is now saturated by them. Wow. So, of course, they've gone to Washington, D.C. now looking for help. And they've met with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and the U.S. Department of Labor seeking federal help. But I wouldn't hold my breath, because if it's Springfield, Ohio, and Whitewater, Wisconsin are having these problems, how many other towns are there that are going through this? That maybe the locals there know about it, but it's under the radar nationally. We don't know. We don't know what we don't know. So there's that gap between the joy of the Harris campaign and the human toll in Israel and across the U.S. heartland. So now, this is funny. Remember when they dethroned Joe Biden and Harris was installed as the heir apparent, and then all the Democrats went to Chicago for their big convention, and they all just, practically, stirred themselves into a permanent coma of exuberance over the prospects for a massive Harris Walz victory in November. And at the same time, the polls were beginning to suggest that Donald Trump was not going to be able to hold a lead over Harris the way he had been leading Biden by, in many cases, 5 to 6 points, and especially in the swing states. And everybody got all excited about the closing poll, the tightening of the races, if you believe these polls, which, I'd caution against that. But nonetheless, they're out there, and it was really interesting. The YouGov poll, one of the metrics that it analyzes is voter enthusiasm. So in August, at the height of the Harris frenzy among the Democrats, their poll on voters who were very or extremely enthusiastic about the November elections showed that the Democrats held a 70 to 58 advantage. 70% of Democrats polled were very or extremely enthusiastic, to 58% among Republicans. Here come the September numbers. What do you suppose has happened in the aftermath of the convention? And now the reality that every time Kamala Harris opens her mouth, nobody knows what the heck she's talking about. Or if they do, she's saying things that are potentially very dangerous to working men and women and to the overall health of the economy. So now you've got, in September, the enthusiasm deficit has shrunk. Now you've got 60% of Republicans saying they're very enthusiastic about the November elections, and only 59% of the Democrats. That's an 11-point swing. That's called cratering, okay? So if you want to hold on to one number for today, look at the enthusiasm deficit. And I can only imagine it's going to grow more in the favor of the Republicans, especially after the September 10 debate, if it ever happens, on ABC. I still think that Kamala Harris's campaign, meaning Barack Obama's campaign, is going to figure out a way to weasel out of that debate. Maybe a sudden onset of COVID-19 across the campaign staff, or maybe, I don't know, some natural disaster or some other unforeseen news event that will cause them to postpone and maybe ultimately cancel the debate. I'm thinking that's still a huge possibility. Meanwhile, speaking of distractions, because they're looking for them all the time with the help of the media, who is more than happy to accommodate, we've learned that major players in right-wing political discourse have been working unknowingly for a company that was a front for a Russian influence operation, according to U.S. prosecutors. Russia is back. Remember Russian hoax in 2016 and Russia role in the information disinformation campaigns surrounding the Hunter Biden laptop in 2020. Oh, that wasn't Hunter's laptop. That was Russian disinformation. That was a hoax. Well, they're back with more Russia. An indictment filed Wednesday, which would be, let's see, September 4, 2024, alleges a media company linked to 6 conservative influencers was secretly funded by Russian state media employees to churn out English language videos consistent with the Kremlin's interest in amplifying U.S. domestic divisions in order to weaken U.S. opposition to Russian interests, like its war in Ukraine, its unjust aggression in Ukraine. Now, they're saying that these were influencers. These are basically talk radio guys, except now they have podcasts. So they're on radio, they're on streaming networks. But to call them influencers, these are talk show guys. They have guests on. They talk about current affairs. Okay? Now, they wanted to plant this little Russia seed here so that they could say that there's a third straight presidential election in which U.S. authorities have unveiled politically charged details about Russia's attempts to interfere in U.S. politics. But what really is going on here? Because the Justice Department, according to this report by the Associated Press, the Justice Department doesn't allege any wrongdoing by the podcasters, including Tim Pool and Benny Johnson. Now, I've mentioned them on this podcast before. Am I an influencer now? Kind of sounds nice. Maybe I need to get new business cards. I don't know. I've mentioned Tim Pool and Benny Johnson before. Anyway, the accusation is that a couple of Russians were funneling money into a Tennessee-based content creation company, and that these podcasters were providing content to this company in exchange for, a contractual agreement and some amount of pay. You do a contract, you say, here's what you're going to pay me for my content, here's your content, here's your money. Okay, happens all the time. But, you got to remember something about especially Benny Johnson. He was one of the first independent journalists, and that's really what these guys are, even beyond talk show hosts. A lot of them are very independent-minded journalists at heart. He was the first guy to go to Butler, Pennsylvania, after a little greaseball tried to shoot Donald Trump in the head on July 13th. Benny Johnson went to Butler, and we talked about it in depth here on this very program. He went with 2 members of Congress, and they went up on the roof where the shooter was allowed to perch himself on July 13th. They showed us the big water tower. They showed us the whole venue. And they drove home how failed the Secret Service's presence had been that day, how totally butchered the operations were, and how obvious it was to them when they visited that you put 5 guys on the water tower, you don't have an incident, nothing ever happens. So I wonder if this is a little bit of getting even to try to smear Benny Johnson and Tim Pool and other podcasters who have dared to do the work that the networks won't do, or the Washington Post, or the New York Slime. I love radio talk host Mark Levin calls it the Washington Compost. Perfect. That is perfect. Meanwhile, the Democrats and the media, but I repeat myself, as a famous talk show host says, Chris Plant, he always says the Democrats and the media, but I repeat myself, which he's right. They seem to be fine with letting bad actors from China infiltrate our country. 2 stories just this week. This one, you can't make it up. Federal prosecutors on September 3 unsealed an indictment alleging that a former aide for 2 New York governors worked as a spy for China. Governor Kathy Hochul's former deputy chief of staff, Linda Sun, worked as an unregistered foreign agent, committed visa fraud, smuggled illegal immigrants into the United States, and conspired to launder money, according to the Department of Justice. They arrested Sun and her husband, Chris Hu. Chris Hu, whom prosecutors allege participated in his wife's schemes, and they also named in their indictment. Wow. During her career as a New York government official, Sun blocked Taiwanese diplomats from meeting with high-level New York officials. She allegedly modified high-ranking New York officials' messaging and language about topics important to China. She also obtained official New York State proclamations for Chinese officials without proper authorization. Wow. She's working for the governor of New York. And by the way, she worked for the previous governor, slimy Andrew Cuomo. So she's been hanging around. And remember, the U.S. Senator from California, Feinstein, had a Chinese employee for 20 years, unvetted, who was clearly a spy of some degree. Here's another one. A federal jury on September the 2nd convicted Zhu Wang. It's kind of fun to say. Zhu Wang on 4 charges, including acting as an unregistered foreign agent and lying to law enforcement. Mr. Wang is 75 years old, born in the United States with Chinese heritage. He helped start a pro-democracy group in the New York borough of Queens that allegedly opposed the Chinese government. But Wang used his position in the group to collect sensitive information about Chinese dissidents abroad, which he then reported to the Chinese government. For more than a decade, Wang lived a double life as an informant to 4 officials at China's Ministry of State Security. So we finally caught up to this guy. By the way, they've interviewed him multiple times, top intelligence officials, going back to 2019. And yet, we're just catching up to him. He pleaded not guilty and was convicted after a week-long trial. He faces up to 25 years in prison. His sentencing is scheduled for January of 2025. So you'd think that Russia was always the problem, but our federal government, our Department of Justice, has all these problems with China infiltrating our country, and they don't seem to ever have time to get around to it. By the way, you'd think they'd be that the White House and the Department of Justice would be concerned about the more than 100 hostages in Israel held by Hamas, or about the 700 plus prisoners of January 6th who have been sentenced on all manner of charges, many of them completely ginned up and in many cases charges that would normally be misdemeanors that are now causing people to be imprisoned for months, if not years. But is the White House worried about any of those folks, their own citizens and innocents in Gaza? No. But they did negotiate a deal with Nicaragua. I'm not making this up. Just this week to release 135 political prisoners. Wow, thank God we got those poor people out. Never mind our own folks, though. Nicaragua? Are you kidding me? All right, folks, we got to look a little bit more inwardly here to our own state of affairs in the state of North Carolina. Seth Keshel is a blogger and a election data analyst. Seth Keshel, and he did a deep dive for us on North Carolina, analyzing all of our 100 counties. And here's what he has to say to us. First of all, he says that it is now obvious through the proliferation of rigged polling that North Carolina is on the steal table once more, meaning the election theft table, because it's so important, just as it was in 2020. The state is absolutely essential to Donald Trump's hopes in 2024, and if he holds it, then he will have his core 235 electoral vote foundation to build on, putting him on the putting green for 270, which is the magic number you need to win. 270 electoral votes. Without it, he could win all of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin and still lose unless he gets Arizona or Nevada with it. That is a tall task. Yes, it is. So Seth Keshel has reviewed the voter registration situation, which is trending dramatically well for Republicans in North Carolina. There was like a 5% deficit between Democrat registrants in 2020 and 5.3% election Democrat registration lead in 2020. It's diminished to 1.7% at the end of August 2024. That's good. So his final take is this. In the most pessimistic scenario he can conceive of, he sees Trump prevailing over Harris for president by 1.44%, 87,150 votes. That takes into account conservatively estimated gains for Trump in all counties, which are likely to be low gains, and with sustained Harris progression in Wake and Mecklenburg and other competitive or Democrat counties, and not pricing in a minority vote that is likely to be much more supportive for Trump in 24, which is true. So it could be no less than a 1.44% victory, but if Trump holds his 2020 losing margins from Mecklenburg and Wake, the lefty counties, and avoids further regression in those counties, he will have a margin of more than 3%. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. You may have heard of a very well-known political analyst in the state named John Davis, who's been publishing a subscription-only newsletter for 38 years, for crying out loud. He says this about the North Carolina General Assembly. Republicans have become masters at gerrymandering state Senate and House districts to their advantage and successfully litigating the constitutionality of their maps. What choice did we have? Republicans, here he goes. Republicans have an advantage in 26 of the 50 Senate districts. Republicans can win the 30 seats needed for a supermajority if they hold their districts and pick up 4 more from 5 competitive districts. Okay, or pick off a few from Democratic-friendly districts. Okay, now he also refers to Republicans in the House. They have an advantage in 69 of the 120 state House districts. Republicans can win the 72 seats needed for a supermajority if they hold their districts and pick up 3 more from the competitive districts or any from of the 48 Democratic-friendly districts. And then he says, this is important, regarding fairness in map making, those standards were set by the Democrats long ago. And ain't that the truth? Ain't that the truth, folks? I want to send you out with something that I ran across on social media. It's not all toxic out there on social media. And we're going to send you out today on this beautiful 5th day of September 2024 with a rendition of the hymn, Great is Thy Faithfulness. It was posted on Instagram by the daughter, I should say, of a 95-year-old woman, a lifelong pianist, a lifelong Christian woman who is suffering with the decline that comes with 95 years of age, mental decline. But her daughter posted that she was having a very good day recently, and so she sat her down at the piano and she began to play. So here it is. Great is thy faithfulness, and boy, do we ever need to count on his faithfulness to us as a nation in the times in which we live. Thank you for joining us once again on the Liberty Podcast, and we'll see you right here next time.